Just a few quick reminders. If please check your career plan part 1 assignment. If I gave you notes and I did not grade it, please refer to the notes that I put in the assignment and make the necessary adjustments. I have reopened that assignment. It's going to be very important for you to get that first part done correct because you will need it for part 2 and for part 3. Please remember that your goals must be career planning goals, not personal goals. Even though I know the book gave a lot of examples on personal goals, but these are career goals. All right. This week, you should be working with career services to get your resume reviewed. Some of you may have to go into the campus. So today won't be a very long day because I know some people have already started making appointments for today and have to go in. And we try to accommodate that, because I know some people have set out certain times throughout the day to work in school. So we want to, be mindful of that. So today we won't be in here too long. Tomorrow will be a little bit longer. And then on Thursday, I just wanted to remind you that that is your midterm. So in addition to you turning in your signed resume, if you turn in an unsigned resume, I'm just going to give it back to you. So you won't get points for an unsigned resume. So please make sure that it's signed. On Thursday, you'll do your midterm. So just make sure that you are aware of that. Okay, so pay attention to the chapters that we're going over. We're going to spend some time on chapter 10 mainly, but make sure you read chapter 3 because chapter 3 will be part of your midterm, even though we'll do some of the work in chapter 3, I think, on next Monday, but it will be part of your midterm. Not a lot, maybe 1 or 2 questions, but make sure you're reading chapter 3 as well. All right. The midterm will be on week 1's chapters and week 2. So that is what chapters 1, 2, I think it's 1, 2, 4, 7, 3, and 10. All right. So chapter 10, we're going to be in both today and tomorrow, and we're going to focus in on interviewing. Like I told you last week, one of the goals is to help you understand the process of interviewing. So it is my hope that by the end of this week, you will know everything you need to know about interviewing and you won't be afraid of it. You'll understand it and you'll know how to prepare for it. With that in mind, let's, think about the initial start of an interview. At some point in the application process, you will be what? Invited to a job interview. This is where the employer is looking to learn more about you, verify things on your resume to see if your skills align with the skills that are needed for that position. Most times the invitation will happen via phone or via email. Now, when that happens, I hate to say this, but I am guilty of this. Make sure when you are interviewing that your voicemail is clear. Make sure that you have a proper voicemail message and make sure that you are checking your voicemails frequently. That may seem very common, but it's not. Many of us don't even check our emails frequently. Do you check your spam folder? I've had situations, and I am going to blame it on the 407 phone number. When I moved back home from New Jersey, I got a new number. I got a 407 number. And when I tell you, I had never gotten so many spam calls in my life until I had gotten the 407 number. And when I was applying for jobs, my mailbox would end up full and I wasn't clearing it out well. And I had a company that was like, hey, we're trying to get a hold of you, but your mailbox is full. And they sent me a text and I was embarrassed because, interviewing, job search one-on-one is to make sure your mailbox is not full, right? Are you trying to hurt yourself? But it was because I was getting all these spam calls. So I actually had to switch over my number to a 689 number because of that. And the spam's actually reduced, but I don't know what it was. I've heard that 407 gets a lot of spam because they recycle the numbers a lot, but whatever. So make sure that your voicemail box, guys, check it, be polite. I even once, I'm not proud of it, but I answered the phone in a very hurried manner once, and it was a job, and the guy kind of got offended a little bit because, I thought it was somebody else, and I could tell that he was like, ew. And yeah, and he didn't call back either. He was like, I was trying to call you because I was, um, I saw that you were interested in this position, and so he was like, oh yeah, just send me your information. I never heard from him again, and I was like, oh my goodness, I wonder if it's because I was a bit rude when I answered the phone. I thought it was somebody else. But anyway, so don't do that. Don't be like me, right? Make sure you proper good etiquette. But anyway, with that in mind, let's talk about this, my friends. When you are interviewing, there will be a lot of different types of interviews. The first type of interview will be a screening interview, and it will primarily be done via phone. So, like I said, when you initially get, an invitation to interview, we know it's going to be via phone or via email. The screening interview primarily will be via phone. Sometimes it will be via video, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. The other type of interview is a structured interview. It's the most common type of interview. And then finally, the unstructured interview, which is an interview that most of you will be having. So when it comes to this screening interview, what is it? Well, it's really designed to figure out if you have the skills to do the job. You may say, well, I turned in my resume, so clearly I must have the skills, but you would be surprised, how many people say things on their resume, but then when they ask the person, can you dig a little bit more into, have you actually done this work? Turns out that, the way that they explained it on the resume was not exactly what the people were looking for. So oftentimes they will have someone from HR to call you to do what's called a screening interview. And I know many of us get disappointed when, we get these calls or we get this email that says, hey, we want to meet with you, but then it just turns out to be some HR person that's just doing a quick little few questions. Now, you'll always know it's a screening interview because they will always say, can I 15 minutes over the phone? Okay, it's a screening interview because most interviews are not going to be over the phone and most of them are not going to be for 15 minutes. So at least that will be a dead giveaway that it is a screening interview, so you don't get your hopes up and everything. But what you do want to do, because you do need to make it past that screening interview, what typically happens is, let's say that this company uses an ATS system. They probably have ran your resume through the ATS system, the ATS system has given them a thumbs up, then it goes to HR person. The HR person is now going to call you just to verify if everything is good to go. And indeed, you have the qualifications. And then they're going to give a stack of resumes to the hiring manager. And that hiring manager, in most cases, will then set up the interview with all the candidates that the HR person has screened. So you're not going to get a lot out of that HR person. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. Sometimes a company will have the HR person do more of a preliminary interview than what is common, but most times it will be the hiring manager, because at the end of the day, the HR person doesn't do the work, so they may not have an intimate experience with what the hiring manager needs, right? So that's how you know it's a screening interview. There are a few things that you do want to ask during this screening interview, and we will talk about it as we go into these other sections, right? But that is what the screening interview is for. The most common type of interview that many of us have probably had is the structured interview. It is a formal interview where they're using this opportunity to determine if you have the skill set. It's also known as a directive interview. So on your midterm, I know one of the questions will be, a structured interview is also known as a what? Formal interview, a directive interview. Make sure you put directive interview. Don't get confused, because I think they're going to have formal interview as an option. It is also known as a directive interview, right? In this interview, because they want to compare apples to apples, they're going to ask all candidates the exact same questions. If they ask candidate A 10 questions, they're going to ask you 10 questions. That's important because you may have noticed sometimes when you interview that if maybe the interviewer or yourself, you're on question 7 and that question runs over, and then they say, oh no, but I have a few more questions, I have a few more questions, and then sometimes you may think, well, that question was already answered, or that question seems repetitive. It's because they have to ask you all 10 questions, because they're going to then compare your answers to the next person's answers. Make sure, guys, that when you are in this interview, that you manage your time well. You almost have to manage the interviewer. Interviewing is not a skill that is learned because you are a hiring manager, right? It's something that let me rephrase that. It's something you learned over time. They're not trained. If they're in a company that is very sophisticated, maybe they will train their managers. I've seen that in corporate environments. Why do I say that? You may get an interviewer who's long-winded, who talks too much, who goes off topic. And most times they only have 1 hour with you, right? And then they're on to the next candidate. Sometimes you have to manage that interviewer. How do you do that? If the interviewer is a bit long-winded, you may have to shorten your answers a little bit, because you want to get through that interview. No, you don't know how many questions the interviewer has to ask you, but you don't want to get caught in a scenario where the interviewer's been a bit long-winded, you're being too long-winded, they don't get through the questions where they say, those are all my questions I have for you. And now you've cheated yourself out of the interview, because let me tell you something, when that person goes back, they still probably, unless they're the top person, most times they're not, they still have to go back and take all those answers and compare it to the next guy. And, of course, they're going to couple their personal experience with you in that. They're going to factor that in, but they're going to compare answers. And so you want to make sure that you get through those answers, right? Like, so you don't want to be like, okay, Tommy, could you quit talking about baseball? My goodness, right? Of course, they're going to start out maybe being a little bit more, whatever, conversational, because they want to build rapport, but try to keep your answers short. And we'll talk a bit more about what to say and what not to say tomorrow. But just be mindful of that. It's very structured. They have to get through these questions. You want to be succinct. We'll talk about how to answer those questions tomorrow, but don't go down that rabbit hole with, being too, conversational, and, wasting time, because again, that person may not be good at interviewing and you don't want that to hurt you. All right. So anyway, these are typical structured interviews. The questions will go from very general, tell me about yourself. We'll talk about how to answer those tomorrow, the very specific, and we'll get into that. The other type of interview is called an unstructured interview. Now, this is less formal. Sometimes it will start out as a structured interview, and then it will go into, either, some type of hands-on exercise, a walkthrough of the campus. It could be what we call a working interview. Some of you may have been told that you're going to have this type of interview. Have any of you been told by your instructors or career services? Give me a thumbs up that you will have what we call a working interview. That means maybe you show up in scrubs, maybe you show up in steel-toed boots with some pants on. Okay, I see one hand. And, so it's going to start out structured, but then it's going to go into, hey, we're going to work alongside you. Okay, so you guys have been told that, right? And they want to see you physically do the work, right? So those are unstructured interviews. They may still ask you questions throughout that process. So just be mindful of that. And we'll talk about how you answer those questions tomorrow, but don't assume just because it's unstructured that you won't have a series of questions that will be, given to you to ask. And you will want to answer those questions just like you were in a structured interview. Now, don't ever, please, show up to a company without doing research on the company. Nothing is more off-putting than you showing up to a company and you don't know anything about the company. Put yourself in the interviewer's shoes. Doesn't that seem a little tacky? I just applied and I need a job. Like, you don't want to give that. This is your career. So the expectation is that you have sought out companies that align with your career goals. They expect you to have career goals. Sometimes they will even ask, what are your career goals? No company in your career expects you to just say, hey, man, I need a job. Target is in every town. This is your career. They expect you to have done some research and to have a solid answer as to why you apply to their company. They also expect you to be able to converse with them about the company. So when we get into the questions tomorrow and they start saying, tell me about yourself, they may lead with that, and then they'll go into, okay, let me tell you about the company. Or sometimes they'll start with telling you about the company. whenever they start talking about the company, whether they start first or they start after you, this is where you will interject your knowledge about the company. This is where you will do a little bit of that conversing, but not too much, right? So you need to know the basics. You need to know what that company does, what type of services, what type of products, how big it is, know what's going on in the economic environment. Maybe, the state of Florida has done a mandate on a certain industry. I'm not saying go do a research paper, but you need to know something. As a matter of a fact, you should be doing that now. You should know what's going on in your industry. Like just this morning, I have a bad habit of waking up and the first thing I do is, turn to the news. Now, I don't watch news because that's just propaganda. I actually go in, to news channels on my, I Google the news and I look for news all over the place to see what's happening in my industry. I'm always looking in the tech industry, in the legal industry where I am primarily. And I look to see what's happening in my industry. You should know what's going on in your industry, know where that company fits into that, who are their competitors. Go to their website because a lot of times companies will have, the most recent article or news about their company. Maybe they just acquired a different company. Maybe they were just recently sold. Maybe they are expanding into Southeast region. And when the person starts to talk to you about their company, you can say things like, yeah, I read about that, or I saw that on your website. I was curious about that, and ask a smart question like, will this position be a part of that project? Because I know you said that you guys were expanding in Tampa. That's your opportunity to let them know, yes, 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 I am aware of what's happening with this company. It will impress them because now they start to visually put you in the company because now you're chatting about the company. It's almost like talking about football, right? You know how it is when you're talking about football or sports and the person knows what you're talking about, and now you guys can have this conversation. It's the same type of thing. So make sure you know what the company is about. During that job interview, like I said, you are the focus. They will ask you questions to get to know them, but it's also an opportunity for you to get to know them, right? And, I'll tell you tomorrow the types of questions you want to ask them because, well, let me first say this. This is one of the reasons why we had you do your long-term goals first, because like I said, before you get into your short-term goals and deciding, okay, exactly what steps am I going to take to get to this goal, let me do some research. So if you have decided you want to become a master electrician, or maybe you've decided you want to become a veterinarian one day, or you've decided you want to become a veterinary technician specializing in animals with, terminal illnesses. Maybe you want to be a researcher. You're going to choose a company as the first step that is in alignment with your goal. If my goal is to become a master electrician and own my own business, maybe I want to go work for a smaller company, right? Maybe I want to work for a company that deals in residential because I want to own my own business. So I'm going to be dealing with residential clients. So I want to work for a company that deals with residential clients. You see how that works? Why? So I can get my hands dirty, so I can figure out what that looks like. That is the whole point. It needs to be strategic. And if you have your career goal in mind, it helps lead you to the right position. Does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. Right? Now, the book talks about, and it puts you in the driver's seat, right? When you have a career, it's not about someone giving you a job. Those days are over. You are in charge of your career and you have to steer it. You have to steer it. You have to, if you go in this direction, let's say you decide to go work in a government environment, in government contracts, because you can work for the government and they have contracts, and you can be in that thing for 10, 20 years, but your goal was to own your own business. That may not make sense, right? So your decisions are going to affect whether you can be successful at what it is you're trying to do. And it requires you to make these decisions um, in a strategic way to ensure your success. There is no secret to success. The secret is preparation and opportunity, right? You prepare, you make your plan, and when the opportunity arises, you're able to take advantage of it. That's how people become successful. So that is why you want to really start to think about, okay, what kind of company I want to work for, so when I, think about my step 2, I can say, okay, I want to become a master electrician. So my first step is to go find a company that deals in residential services, as opposed to, let me just go find somebody that's willing to hire me. Because then you don't know where your career is going to go, and it could go in a different place, right? And you want it to go the way you want it to go. The book talks about, a lot of companies not doing face-to-face. There's some truth to that, not in most of your careers. However, don't get comfortable with that, because your boss or your hiring manager may be out of town one day, especially if you work for an institution where they travel. I'm sure many of you may have heard of that. You may have to travel to the site and they may not be available. They could be down on the site and they say, hey, we need you to jump online to meet. You need to be prepared for that. So we'll talk about making sure you have all those things downloaded onto your phone, your computers, because it is common, even if not for the first interview, you may have to have a follow-up interview with like the CEO or the top manager, and they may not need to see you in person, but they just want to set their eyes on you because they want to see what the hiring manager, or see who the hiring manager wants to hire. So don't think that you may not have to do a virtual interview just because you're going into these respective fields. So just be prepared for that. If it is an interview, this is something that you will want to ask the screener. As I mentioned before, some things to ask the screener. Make sure that screening person tells you where the interview is. It could be at a remote location, like on the project site, if it's an unstructured interview. And sometimes, even if it's not an unstructured interview, they may want you to meet on the project site. So do not assume because the corporate office is at this location that is where you're going to meet. Make sure you tell them, even if, unless they tell you in the screening interview, okay, I'll send you, where you're going to meet and who you're going to meet. You can ask, will this be at the corporate office or will this be on the project site? Make sure you ask. Don't always assume that this person is efficient enough to remember that. I've had instances where I've been given the wrong address to a meeting. So that is one question you want to ask the interviewer. The screening HR person. Another question to ask is who you're going to meet with. Sometimes they say, oh yeah, you'll meet with Sarah because she may know there's only one Sarah, but you don't know there's only one Sarah. So you say Sarah Adams, Sarah Smith, who? Make sure you get that person's name. There's another reason why you want to do that. I'll tell you. But make sure you know exactly who you're going to talk to. Maybe there is more than one Sarah and she forgot. So you get to the corporate office, there's a receptionist. You go, I'm here to speak to Sarah. She's like, Sarah who? I'm like, oh my God, no, you don't want that drama. Make sure you get the person's first and last name. Another reason why you want to get that person's first and last name is because you are going to go and Google them before you get there. You need to know Sarah Adams. You need to know about Sarah Adams. Go to Sarah Adams' LinkedIn page and see what's up with Sarah Adams. So we'll talk about how to use that tomorrow, but that's another reason why you want that person's name. And then lastly, after your interview, you're going to make sure that you send Sarah Adams a thank you note for taking the time to interview you. So there's a lot of different reasons why you want that person's first and last name. When the screener does send you an email with the confirmation of your interview, look to see if she's copied Sarah. Most times they will copy Sarah on the interview chain, like in an email. Make sure you jot down that email, because again, once you're done with that interview with Sarah, you're going to send Sarah a thank you note for interviewing you, not the screener, right? So you need Sarah's information. Sometimes you can even find it on the internet, but that's another reason why you want to get that from the screener. In a structured interview, sometimes you have to meet with more than one person. We call that a panel interview. Has anyone ever had a panel interview before? Some people love them, some people hate them. If you like it, it's one shot. I meet with 3 of y'all. I don't have to meet with you again. If you don't like it, if you don't like it, it's like, oh my God, 3 people, all these eyeballs looking at me. It makes me nervous. But then conversely, what happens is if you don't meet with them now, then that means you have to go back and meet with them later. I'd rather just get it out of the way. But if you do have a panel interview, typically, if at all, it may be the HR person. 9 times out of 10, it won't be, but sometimes they'll have an HR person there. Most times it's either your direct supervisor, sometimes a colleague, but most times they don't have colleagues in the interviews. It could be your supervisor and their supervisor. Sometimes it can be your supervisor and a department that you could be working with, and one of their supervisors. Sometimes it can be, again, your supervisor and their supervisor, right? So it just depends, but that is what a panel interview is. Most times you'll see a panel interview with higher positions. Like if a company is hiring a CEO, I've sat in some of those and it's like 20 of us around the table interviewing this person because they want somebody from each department. They want someone from different levels. You'd be surprised, in a CEO interview, but for most entry-level jobs, you won't see too much of a panel interview, but the higher up you go, you'll start to see more panel interviews. All right. So we're going to stop here for today. And tomorrow, we're going to dig into all those questions. So all the questions that you ever had about interviewing, I'm going to dissect them for you. I'm going to tell you how to answer those questions. I'm going to tell you why they ask those questions. I'm going to tell you what to ask in your interview, what not to ask in your interview. And we're going to really, really dig into it. So please make sure you read chapter 10 so that you will be prepared to talk about those interview questions tomorrow. For today, here is your live session question. The question says, what is your most hated interview question and why? We all have one. Or if you've never had one before, just what would it be? Your assignment for today, in addition to this question, is to talk about a bad interview experience. If you've never had a bad interview experience, then you can talk about what would constitute a bad interview experience. Like, oh my God, I would die if I ended up at the wrong location. Or, it would be horrible if, I couldn't answer a question, or whatever you think would be a bad interview experience. All right. All right, my friends, thank you so much for your time today. I know, please make sure you get those resumes reviewed so that you can turn them in on Thursday. All right, guys, have a great day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.